Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at this orchid and how it has progressed since I cut off all its dried flower spike. And its parentage are listed in the video here. For the life of me, I can never remember it. Every single time when I make a video about this orchid, I have to look it up. Because I've conditioned my brain to call this one by its nickname, and that is Yellow Mini Mark. So there you go, that's the parentage. So this one, it started to grow a new spike toward the end of January 2020. It's a sequential bloomer, but the two long spikes that it had basically did their job and eventually dried up since the last video that I did about this orchid's overall sequential blooming cycles. I can't remember exactly, but on and off, it just kept blooming and blooming and blooming until the two spikes that it had eventually dried up. And this one is a new spike. I didn't expect for it to have a new spike this quickly. So it's kind of interesting how this orchid just kind of came back with a new spike, soon after I cut off the spikes, the old spikes, and then put it into a new growing method. So this one was repotted into the no-hole moss growing method. So the trick of this method is basically you need to ensure that the moss that you use is fluffy. So you don't want to pack it down too much. You want to really allow a lot of aeration in the cup, in the container, because there's no drainage hole. So you also need to really pay attention to the amount of water that you give to this orchid. The best case scenario really is that you use some kind of tool to ensure that you only give it, for example, I give this orchid each time anywhere between 1/8 of a cup to a 1/4 cup of water. In summertime, I know this orchid would need more water, so I tend to go with 1/4 cup, and then in winter time, I usually reduce it down to about 1/8 of a cup. And that seems to be enough for this orchid to have its wet-dry cycle completion in about 7 to 10 days. Like in summertime, obviously, it's about 7 days. And then in wintertime, it is about 10 days. But sometimes I do stretch it to about 2 weeks just to make sure that these orchids are completely dry. The media is completely dry in between waterings in my winter time here. And this orchid also receives quarter strength fertilizer, so 25%. And a lot of my Chinese subscribers ask me how I make sure it's 25%. And I said that, well, it's very basic math that I do. For example, I have enough orchid, so if I feel I need to use a big amount of solution, then, for example, 1 teaspoon to 1 gallon is the recommended dosage from the label. And if I want to do 25%, so there are two ways I can do it. If I use the same amount of fertilizer, 1 teaspoon, then I need to make sure the water that I prepare is 4 gallon. Or 1 gallon of water to a quarter of a teaspoon. So either you increase the water amount or you reduce the fertilizer by 75%. So back to this orchid. This orchid does not have any fragrance, unfortunately, but because of its lovely orange lip and then the tiny dots or freckles on the sepals and petals, so this one also has a nickname of yellow version of Yellow Mini Mark, or the yellow version of Mini Mark. And they do have quite close resemblance if you put them side by side. In fact, I have a video of
them having side by side. It's within one of my mini mark videos. I just can't remember exactly which one. If you're interested, feel free to go onto my channel to search for it. I remember that they had some overlap in their flowering, so I put them side by side, and you actually get to see them. They're really similar, except that this one is have a lot of yellow in its flower sepals and petals. And when this one was developing its spike, I also made sure that I don't move this orchid, as much as possible. And as a result, the angle that this orchid receives sunlight from the window, but then also where it was, so that it was getting some additional LED grow light as light source. So this orchid has a very I guess, neat cascade look, and the flowers are facing the same way, almost the same way, and in a way I just feel that this orchid is very quote-unquote obedient. I did somehow use a twist tie to try to prop up the flower spike a little bit. I still am a big fan of allowing the orchid to grow the spikes however they want, but for this one I just wanted to make sure that the flower spike is growing upward and then cascade, because this one is a sequential bloomer, and I just didn't want this orchid to grow its spike freely, because that would just take too much horizontal space. And because I have quite a few other orchids on the same shelf, and I just don't want to waste horizontal space for horizontally growing spikes. The biggest pity for this orchid really is that it doesn't have any fragrance, but the look and feel of the overall orchid kind of makes up for it. I can stare at this orchid for quite some time. When it was in bloom, every morning I wake up, I would just go to this orchid and then have a stare at it. And overall, I really think this orchid is a rewarding cross. And it's not fussy at all. I basically provide the same care I would with a grocery store Phal, and they all perform as expected. The only thing that surprised me was how quickly it was willing to produce a new flower spike. And because this orchid is in a no drainage hole container with moss in there, so the key really is to control the amount of water you provide each time. And I do soak this orchid once a month with just pure reverse osmosis water, and that is to allow the water to dissolve any extra salt buildup, or just give this orchid a proper rinse. But I soak it. But then because there's no drainage hole, how do I get rid of the water? What I do is I just tilt the cup to a point where the water is can flow out of the cup, can flow out of the container, and then eventually I kind of hold it up and just let the water drip until it would not drip anymore, and that's when I can feel safe about putting this orchid back to where it is. And of course, if it's in spike or in buds, you want to make sure that when you put it back, you try to keep the same position, the same angle, or however it was growing. You just want to make sure that it keeps the same. You keep it at the same position, so that way the flower spike can continue to grow and not be crooked. This growing method was a bit of a gamble for this orchid, because when I was trying to decide what method to use for this orchid, it had some decent roots, but it's not as well as I liked. So I used this method just to see if it'll grow better. It has produced a few roots since, but it's not filling up the cup, and I suspect that simply because this cup is just bigger than it was needing. But it's okay, the fact that it can flower, and hopefully with some additional care, maybe as this orchid continue to age, it would be able to produce more roots. That only time can tell. But from what I can see, I'm pretty satisfied with its first flowering from this new spike. And hopefully we will see more flowers, sequential blooms to come for this year.
This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!